23?
Yeah. Although I realize these days today's Navy giving him the high my time. All right. Yeah, we're up to chapter 23. Is that thing aimed in the right direction?
Yes, I'm on my job.
Okay. Well, you weren't the one that set it up. I don't know.
I've already moved it.
Oh, okay.
Looks good.
All right. Believe it or not, probably I know you'll choose not. I'm going to try to cover a whole chapter tonight. All right, we are looking at the death of Sarah, and the overall story behind this is not just the fact that Abraham's wife dies, but her death sets up the groundwork for Abraham finally to get his foot in the door on what might be considered a permanent residency. Up until this point, and even as we go into chapter 23, Abraham is still viewed by all of the residents of Canaan as a nomad. He just happens to live wherever he can find pasture land for his cattle, and wherever the local inhabitants, are willing to tolerate him. Which is why it seems like every chapter or two, you'll notice that it says that Abraham was at, and wherever it was he was at will change. Well, at this point, he finally has an excuse to actually purchase a piece of land without it seeming to be a threat to the current inhabitants. All right, verse 23, or chapter 23, verse 1 says, "Now Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah." Now, at this point, if she's 127, how old does that put Abraham and Isaac?
Isaac would be around 26, 27 years old. Didn't she get pregnant at about 100?
She got pregnant at the age of 90.
90.
So she's 127, Isaac is now 37. And that would put Abraham at this point at 137. Because, of course, Abraham was 100 when Isaac was born.
Too much math.
Okay, then don't do the math. All right, Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abram went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Now, has any of you ever seen a Jewish funeral? Well, Jewish funerals is a custom that goes back even before the time of Abraham. When it says that he went in to mourn and weep for her, that's an understatement. They would carry on and just wail, and in fact,
Did they hire mourners?
later on, during the time of Israel as a nation, yes, they would even hire professional mourners that would follow you around and, oh, well, they didn't need professional mourners early on. They carried on pretty much enough of their own. And so, when it says he went in the morning to weep for her, their custom was to pretty much let it out. Now, it says, verse 3 says that Abraham rose from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, now, the sons of Heth, that is another way of basically saying the Hittites. Because if you go back and do a study of the genealogy of Ham and Canaan, one of Canaan's sons was Heth. And the sons of Heth, at this point, as we trace this down, these were the Hittites. Now, there are actually about 3 different groups over the course of biblical history that were referred to as the Hittites. And there's some question as to whether they were different groups that just happened to carry the same name, or if they were somehow related. We still don't know the answer to that question. But one of the major empires that predated the nation of Israel was, in fact, the Hittite Empire. Although there is, again, serious question as to whether this particular group of Hittites were of that empire, because anybody remember from their high school geography where the Hittite Empire was? Now, it was up north of there in what we would now consider Turkey, in Asia Minor. And there's some theories that there was a group of them that navigated south. Others think that this may have been the original group and that there was another offshoot of them that moved north and then became that empire. All of those are just theories. Nobody really knows for sure. But if you recall references to the Hittite Empire, that's not this group. And these sons of Heth are actually later on down in this passage, and you may wonder, well, how do we even know that these are Hittites? Because later in this chapter, it does in fact refer to them as Hittites. Now, while the Hittites were a pagan group within Canaan, it's apparent that some of them apparently either believed in the true God or at least acknowledged the existence of this God. Because as we get into this passage of Scripture, they honored Abraham because they recognized him as being a mighty man of God. Also, we have several significant Hittites that intermarried in with the Israelites later on, and in fact became adopted Jews. For example, who's probably the most famous one that we know of? Uriah, original husband of Bathsheba, always referred to as Uriah the Hittite. But again, there's no indication that he was considered a foreigner because, well, Uriah worshiped their God. So even though he's referred to as Uriah the Hittite, ethnically speaking, he was looked at as one of them because he had accepted the true God as the God that he worshiped. All right, back to the passage. It said, Abraham arose from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. Give me a burial site among you that I may bury my dead out of my sight. Now, his reason for presenting it this way is if he had, as a cattle owner, just approached them and said, I want a piece of land, they would have looked at that as being a threat to them because, well, they knew Abraham was a powerful man and filthy rich. If he'd asked for a piece of land just because I want a piece of land, they would have looked at that as, again, being, excuse me, let me get some. That would have been an incursion into their land. But here, notice how he presents this. He first off says, I'm just a sojourner. In other words, I'm just a nomad. I don't matter. I'm just a wanderer that I just happen to be passing through. All I'm asking for is a place to bury my wife. So by presenting it that way, they don't, they don't look at this as being a threat to them. All right. Verse 5, it says, And the sons of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my Lord. You are a mighty prince among us. bury your dead in the choicest of our graves. None of us will refuse you his grave for burying your dead. Now, why this particular issue is left out, I don't know. I'm actually kind of disappointed in the translators of the New American Standard, which again has a reputation for being one of the most exact translations. But in here in verse 6 where it says you are a mighty prince, there's actually an additional word that is left out, at least in my translation, that's in the original Hebrew. The original Hebrew says he's a mighty prince of God. So they're not recognizing him as just an important man or royalty. They actually recognized him as a man who was a prince of God Almighty. They use the term Elohim, which of course is the word for God. Now, why that's important is the generic term for God. Anybody remember what that would be in Hebrew?
Yahweh.
No, Yahweh is actually God's name.
Is it Elohim?
Just El. El. Just the generic word for God is just El. But they specifically said a mighty prince of Elohim, which could mean one of two things. Either they are recognizing Abraham's God, or, keep in mind, what's the difference between El and Elohim? Elohim's plural. It literally means gods with an S in Hebrew. So either they were saying he's a mighty prince of the gods, or they were recognizing that Abraham's God is in fact Elohim. Because in Hebrew, of course, the true God consistently referred to himself in the plural, which is why it uses the word Elohim and not just El. Now, the times that you'll find El by itself in the singular is usually in when it's together with something else. Like, for example, the term God Almighty, which is El Shaddai. The God that provides, well, actually, that's a different story there. That's a different name. God Most High, El Elyon. You'll notice that those, when it's combined with something else, it's just singular. But in the original language, when they referred to just God, it almost always was Elohim, the plural. And here, they actually referred to him as a mighty prince of Elohim, which tells us, again, one of two things, and it's a flip of the coin based upon how you translate it. Either they were saying that he was a prince of multiple gods, or they were recognizing that he was a prince of our true God. Tells you a little bit about the Hittites, that they might not have been entirely pagan. But anyway, when he approaches them, notice what they tell him here in verse 6. Not only that do they recognize him as a mighty man, but they pretty much say, you can have your pick. Said, none of us are going to deny our land to you. Said, you bury her wherever you want to. Take your pick here. Verse 7 says, so Abraham arose and bowed to the people of the land, the sons of Heth. And by the way, this is the first and only time that the Bible references Abraham as giving deference to somebody else by bowing before them. Now, this isn't a bowing before them as in, a bowing of worship, but just, pretty much doing one of these numbers, sort of to speak, that he's giving them deference and honoring them. The only place in the Bible you see Abraham doing this, because of course Abraham's trying not to be confrontational, because Abraham knows he is a powerful and rich man, and he doesn't want to in any way offend these people and have them brush him off. All right, verse 8, he says, he spoke with them, saying, if it is your wish for me to bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and approach Ephron the son of Zohar for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence for a burial site. Now, notice each time we see a situation here, Abraham, for example, while they pretty much told him, you know, you can have your pick, he tells them which piece of land he wants. For first off, why do you think he wanted a field that has a cave at the end?
They preferred to bury in caves.
Yeah, because that was a normal practice back then. They, you know, they bury somebody if they had to, but they preferred to build sepulchres or bury in a cave. And so this gives him a spot where he can put Sarah, you know, in a cave and wall the cave up and pretty much turn it into a sepulchre. But also, the other issue that I wanted to get to is Abraham could easily have lowballed him. But notice he said, nope, I'll pay full price for it. Later on, when King David approached the potter and said he wanted to buy a field to establish, you know, an altar, and the potter told him, hey, you can have it, you know, you're the king, you know, you take it. How much did David insist on paying him?
The full price.
Full price. And David actually said, you know, on multiple occasions said, I will not sacrifice to God that which costs me nothing. So there's a biblical concept here that God's people don't try to, you know, get over in situations like this. They're willing to pay the full price for it. All right. Verse 10 says, now Ephron was sitting among the sons of Heth. Now, here's where verse 10, we know that the sons of Heth are in fact the Hittites. He said, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the sons of Heth, even of all who went in at the gate of his city. So there we have it right there, that this identification of the sons of Heth are in fact the Hittites. We just don't know which Hittite group there were, because there were actually 3 of them that were known. We mentioned 2 of them. The third group apparently lived somewhere in the area of what we would now call Syria.
And this transaction was taking place at the city gate.
At the city gate.
Which
That's
is their normal transaction spot.
That's their normal. That basically was the city gate back in ancient times was the equivalent of City Hall. And in fact, why would they do a transaction of land in their equivalent of the City Hall?
Witnesses in public.
Well, witnesses is one reason. The other thing is if you're transferring a deed of property, where do you have to go to do that? That's a municipal transaction. So their equivalent of City Hall was the city gate. They'd all sit around the city gate and conduct business with each other. So he's wanting to buy a piece of land, which is going to require they're not just going down to the market to buy, you know, a bushel of potatoes. He's talking about a land transaction. So he's got to have witnesses, and there's got to be a transfer of the deed. So where do you do that? City gate.
Very transparent. And they were very transparent about their dealings. I mean, they didn't really hide stuff.
And that not only they wanted to be honest about it, but Abraham wants to make absolutely certain there's lots of witnesses to go, so that if later on, if this Hittite guy decides to pull a fast one on him and say later on, what are you doing in my, you know, this is my land, Abraham's got a dozen city witnesses that all say, nope, he bought it from you. It's his land now.
So they really didn't have lawyers and all that type of thing. They were very just one-on-one with witnesses. I mean,
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And by the way, when I say a transfer of deed, they didn't have, you know, there's not some piece of paper where They had the lawyer sign off on it and what have you. Their idea of a deed, if they kept any kind of municipal records, it would be recorded in that, which, by the way, again, would not be, they didn't have paper, but some cultures had papyrus. Others would record their deeds on, or their transactions on clay tablets. More than likely what they had there was clay tablets. And it would be recorded on that, and they'd make one that the seller of the land would have something that, would acknowledge that this had been transferred. Abraham would get one that they'd give to him, and then on whatever record that they had that they kept there as would have been considered city records, they'd put it on that. But again, probably at this time in history, probably clay tablets.
Well, since they kept track of taxation and stuff, they would have had to have some method to take care of knowing who had what.
Yep. So yeah, even 3,000 years ago, they still taxed people's land. All right. Okay, let's go back to verse 10. Now Ephron was sitting among the sons of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the sons of Heth, of all who went in at the gate of his city, saying, No, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the presence of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. And Abraham bowed before the people of the land. Now, as we read this, it would seem that could very easily have been the end of the deal. We look at it and think, oh, well, Ephron's a generous man. He's given him the field. That really isn't what was happening. That was their method of haggling. If Abraham had at this point said, oh, okay, thanks, I'll take it, he would have been looked at then not only as being a cheap, miser, but he would have lost all standing with the people around him. When they offered, oh, well, go ahead, just take the land, I'll give it to you. That was just platitudes. They didn't really, in all honesty, mean it that way. You were not expected at this point to actually take them up on it. It just would not have been socially acceptable for Abraham to have accepted his offer of free land. This is just begins the haggling. So, verse 13, he says, he spoke to Ephron, the hearing of the people of the land. Notice that all the witnesses are still sitting around listening to all this. So you've got a haggling over a piece of land going on, and with all these witnesses just sitting here listening to it. And he says, saying, if you will only please listen to me, I will give you the price of the field. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. Then Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, my Lord, listen to me. Now, notice how he puts this out here. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver? What is that between me and you? So bury your dead. Why do you think Ephron, if Ephron's trying to give him the land, why is Ephron throwing out a price here?
Obligation.
Because that's what he really wants.
That's what he really wants. He's being nice, and they're all saving face with each other and say, oh, well, wink, wink, oh, I'm going to give it to you. Yeah, right. And Abraham is like, no. I appreciate that. You folks are great, but let me pay for it. And so Ephron then, again, to try to ingratiate himself and to try to get Abraham kind of snookered, because they're playing one-upmanship with each other. It's what's really going on here. As to which one of us can come out, smelling like roses with the other leaders of the city here. And so he throws out, oh, you know what, you're such an important man. And by the way, they weren't saying that, just for total platitudes. They knew Abraham, in fact, was, a very important man. By the way, here in what is now south central Canaan, why do you think at this point they really were being so nice to Abraham, even though he did not own any land? He was, by his own admission, just a nomad, but yet they do treat him with considerable deference. Why do you suppose that is?
Amalek, the war.
You hit it on the head there. Not only do they know that he is absolutely filthy rich, and they recognize that he has been blessed by his God, whether they believe in this God or not, they know that he has been blessed, but also it hasn't been that many years ago that Abraham took his, 600 men, or no, 300. 300 men out and basically did a number on several city-state kings and was overwhelmingly victorious. Do you think these people don't remember that? They know Abraham can, if he were so inclined to, Abraham could do some serious business with them. And so they're treating him with deference because they recognize that this man knows how to, how to conduct war. And he's got the resources to do it. Now, they don't want to get on his bad side, which is also one of the reasons why, even though he doesn't own any land, that no matter where he goes, they pretty much let Abraham, because, keep in mind, we're not talking about a few dozen cattle. Abraham had probably several thousand head of cattle by this point. And, we've all seen, during the summertime when they have all these cattle, wintertime, I guess it is, when they have all these cattle in this field down here at the end, and there's 1,000, 2,000 head of cattle. Can you imagine somebody with that many head of cattle just kind of coming into your land and saying, oh, my cattle come and graze your land for a while? Most of us would no. But with Abraham, they're like, hey, take your pick wherever you want, because they know he is a powerful man. They've also noticed too by this point, and I hate to use this word, but a lot of these people were pagans. Do you think they also might have been superstitious? And they realize that if Abraham has been blessed by God, what do you think they're hoping?
Spill over on them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're hoping some of this blessing will spill over on me. So anyway, he throws out what is really the amount he wants for this, 400 shekels of silver. He says, what's that between me and you? No problem, bury your dead. Verse 16, Abraham listened to Ephraim, and Abraham weighed out for Ephraim the silver, which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, commercial standard. Now, notice, even though Ephraim says, oh, the land's yours, just take it. Once Abraham whips out his bag of silver and says, anybody, who's got the scales here, and starts weighing it out, notice Ephraim doesn't turn it down. Ephraim takes it, because that's what he really wants for it, is 400 shekels of silver, which I don't remember exactly how much that comes out to, but it's several pounds worth of silver. So, Ephraim's field, this is verse 17, which is in Machpelah, which faced Mamre, the field and cave which was in it, and all the trees which were in the field that were within all the confines of its border were deeded over. So he doesn't just sell him the cave, he gets the whole field. So deeded over to Abraham for a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth before all who went into the gate of his city. And after this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field at Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Notice also, who do we know also put his headquarters at Hebron later on? Remember, before they conquered Jerusalem, King David put his capital at Hebron. That wasn't by mere coincidence. King David put his capital at Hebron because that was the headquarters at this point for Abraham. That's where Sarah was buried. So the field and the cave that is in it were deeded over to Abraham for a burial site by the sons of Heth. Now, why is this important overall in the main story itself? Using the excuse of a place to bury his wife, this is the first time in all of his wanderings that Abraham now actually owns a piece of land. Up until this point, and he even described himself as this, he's been a nomad. Said, I'm just a stranger here. I don't own any land. I'm just passing through, but I need a place to bury my wife. So using that as the excuse, they don't see this as an incursion, but rather, well, sure, I'll give him a field where he can bury his family, because having a place to bury your relatives was a major issue in their culture at that time. But this is the first indication that we have where Abraham has now basically planted a flag and said, this is now mine. And it's there at Hebron. Questions this evening?
He's 137 when Sarah dies, or thereabouts.
Yep.
And then he marries again and has many more children.
He's got a whole much more coming after this, because he marries another lady that's considerably younger named Keturah.
I was skipping ahead trying to find where that is, but it's apparently a pretty good ways ahead.
Well, not too much farther. So,
I'd just like to mention, Bonnie and I watched a video of a tour of Jerusalem,
mhm.
and the guy went through, and one of the things he pointed out, in the city of David there is a spot which they think might be the temple of Melchizedek. They actually have ruins there.
Uh-huh.
And they're not definitive about it yet, but they're talking about the possibility, because it's at a lower level.
Mhm.
It's at the time of around Abraham, and it's a pretty simple area. There's like 4 rooms, and one of them looks like it has what they call like a standing stone that
Mhm.
they anoint with oil, and then there is an area which actually looks like it might be an altar, because it's got channels cut in it to drain blood and stuff like that. So it's pretty interesting.
Mhm. All right. Anybody else? All right. Well, Lou, would you lead us in a bit?